Last video, we went step by step through Matthew McConaughey's discussion with Joe Rogan. Felt like there was one thing in particular that Mr. McConaughey seemed to be stumbling over, and that was the burning bush.
Interpreted and reinterpreted. It has been translated. It has been handed down. I, for myself, I don't know what to do in my daily life with the burning bush. I don't know what to do with that.
When you say you don't know what to do with the burning bush, like what do you mean by that?
I don't know what to do on a daily basis with the teaching of, and then he showed up as a burning bush, or the magic trick. I don't know how to take that into my life and go, oh, there's something useful and practical and healthy for you, Matthew, that you can practice there. So the magic that leans in towards, what we would call now more fantasy. I don't know what to do with that.
So in this video, I will be explaining the meaning and symbolism of the burning bush to Matthew McConaughey and Joe Rogan, and any others of you listening that struggle with the burning bush story, in hopes that we all will understand the deep meaning as well as the practical application of the story's pattern. So why don't we start and read the text of the burning bush? It's pretty short. It's only a handful of verses. So it says, "Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law." This is Exodus chapter 3. The father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian. "And he led the flock to the back of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. Then Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn." It goes on, verse 4. "So when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I," or "Here I am." Skipping down to verse 9. "Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come now, therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." I just want to mention, too, that Exodus chapter 3 is like a huge moment in this narrative and in the Bible. God assures Moses that his presence is with the Israelites. He calls Moses to lead the people out of Egypt and into the promised land. And then the big moment, he reveals his name. I am what I am, which is saying a whole bunch of stuff, that he's self-defining, he's compared to none, that God is self-existent. He doesn't rely on anything else for his being, his existence, that God is beyond all names, that all linguistic identifiers fall short, that he's pure, he's uncreated light, he's being with a capital B. Okay, so I'm obviously drawing from a lot of other places, but this is the moment where he reveals that. So we are going to be moving forward with the symbolic approach from here on out. And let's begin by identifying the pattern. So the burning bush is a theophany. It's an external manifestations of God's presence. And when we look at this text, what we find is that there's the presence of God inside an earthly object or person. That's evidenced by God speaking from within the bush. Secondly, that it's on fire, but it's not consumed. Sometimes the bush is called the unburnt bush. And lastly, that the object is preserved by God's indwelling presence. You can think of it as the bush is like the created thing, or that host, the uncreated, without being consumed by its glory, or being consumed by its fire, or its light. Okay, so we have the bush, or the container, God's indwelling presence, and then a burning fire. Okay, so that's the pattern. So here we go. You know the story, but let's go over it anyway. So God is using Moses to deliver the Israelites out of Egyptian bondage and to take them through the desert wilderness and eventually into the promised land that's abundant and prosperous. So we have the pattern, which is the bush you could think of would be Israel, the people of Israel. The fire would be the Egyptian oppression that is burning the Israelites. But then you have God's indwelling presence that is preserving them. Okay, so I'll link this in the description, but I'm referring to a really great teaching by Alistair Roberts. Okay, so the cool thing about the way of looking at this is there's another layer or another version that we can look at the text that will draw out some really exciting meaning here. So if you think of Egypt, we have the 10 plagues. So we have the hailstones, we have the water that's turned into blood, but then the Israelites have fresh drinking water. You have the frogs that come, the lice and the flies that are tormenting everybody, but not the Israelites. And you also have the livestock disease that takes out their herds and their cattle, their meat and their milk, but not so with the Israelites. And then they also have the boils, aka poison oak times 1,000. That's taking out people, but not the Israelites. We have the fiery hail that's striking down and destroying herd and man of the field and herb and living thing, but not the Israelites. You guys picking up this pattern? And this happens, the 10 plagues, right? Darkness covered the sun for 3 days, but the Israelites' neighborhoods were preserved in the light. And eventually, this pattern reaches its climax, if you will, with the last plague, where God and his presence come, and it's in a form of judgment for the land of Israel, in the land of Egypt. And his presence wipes out the Egyptian firstborn. And the Israelites are preserved because they obeyed God and they put the blood of the lamb, they made the appropriate sacrifice to put over the trim of their doorway, which notified the presence of God to say, no, in this dwelling is the presence of God. And so they were preserved in this. And meanwhile, the firstborn of the Egyptians did not make it. They were consumed by the fire of God's presence in the land. Meanwhile, the Israelites were not consumed by this fiery presence. Okay, so later in the story, we see this pattern again when they go to cross the Red Sea, when this, epic moment where the waters are split for the Israelites and they walk through. So God was in the Israelites, the waters surrounded them, but they were not consumed, they weren't drowned. But when the Egyptians tried to cross through, what happens? Because of the hardness of their heart, they wouldn't allow God's indwelling presence. So in that vacuum, that void of God being in them, what happened? But the waters consumed and drowned the Egyptians. Okay, so before we look at other applications later on in other books of the Bible, I just want to offer up like a simple application. So around here we have poison oak bushes that are pretty bad, and and I don't know what it's like over for where you're from, Mr. McConaughey. Maybe you have poison ivy or something like that. But there's an ancient homeopathic remedy where you actually eat the first buds of the poison oak plant in spring. By consuming the poison oak, it actually preserves you from having bad breakouts whenever you're exposed to it throughout the season. So if you look at this pattern, we have the bush, which would be me, and then you have the indwelling presence of the consumed poison oak that's inside my body, and then the fire would be the exposure to the other poison oak plants, and the result being that I'm exposed but unburned. Okay, so let's look at some other applications. We could look at in the New Testament where Mary, who becomes the mother of God, carries Jesus, right, the Son of God, in her womb. She's a woman of earth that is hosting the divine presence of the Son of God within her. I want to reference at this point a clip from St. Gregory of Nyssa, The Life of Moses, which was written in the late 3rd and early 4th century, somewhere around there. From this we learn also the mystery of the Virgin, the light of divinity which through birth shone from her into human life, did not consume the burning bush, even as the flower of her virginity was not withered by giving birth. Interesting that from an early point, Christians were already saying this is the same pattern of the burning bush with Moses as with the Virgin Mary, the Mother of God, which held the divine, the uncreated, the power of God and his purity of his love within her. And she was not burned by it. She was not consumed by it because she had him within her. And interesting in this image, this icon, you could even see that Christ is in her womb, and then around her is branches, like little squiggly branches and leaves, which is the burning bush, and the flames around those branches. And note the figure on the bottom left, that's Moses. And his little sandals are off his feet, and there's just this intertwining of the two stories interlocking this similar pattern that's being carried out. And here's another picture where the burning bush is actually the Mother of God with the Christ child on her lap. And she's surrounded by the features of the burning bush, the green leaves and the branches, yet with the flames. And then you can see Moses in the various stages of the development of the narrative, where he's approaching the mountain and the bush, he's taking off his sandals because it's holy ground, and then on the far right he's receiving the law. So his interaction with divinity on the mountaintop. On the top of Mount Tabor, Christ reveals a glimpse of his glory to 3 of his close followers. He shines with God's uncreated glory without being consumed by it. It's intense. Peter, James, and John hit the ground. Again, it's just a small picture of God's transcendent being on the earth. A foretaste of when Christ returns again at the end of the age, which we will get to in a moment. So at this point, you're probably wondering, Mr. McConaughey, what the heck does this have to do with the individual believer, me? Well, it says that Jesus baptizes people in the Holy Spirit and fire. Now, what does this mean? It means he wants you to become a burning bush. So he wants you to burn with Christ's divine fire without being consumed by it. We see other modern examples of this in film today. For example, Captain Marvel. She burns with the fire of her superpower, but is not consumed by it. In like manner, this is what God wants us to do on our time on the earth. But unlike Captain Marvel and the fantasy realm, this is for real. Like, this is what you can engage with now. Not as a fan of a show, but as like your life, the way that you go about your days. When we look at what took place at Pentecost in Acts chapter 2, the glory of Christ, which again is like the glimpse at the Transfiguration, is given through the Holy Spirit as flames of fire to the first believers. Jonathan Peugeot writes, Pentecost is the church ablaze, a fire that spreads and consumes until the age itself is consumed. But like the burning bush seen by Moses on the mountain, the church itself is not consumed. It's like a greater scale of this pattern, where the church as a whole is a burning bush that grows and grows from the center all the way out to the end of the world, till the end of the age. Which brings us to our final example, the final judgment. At the end of every season, there's a harvest. There's a transition to the next year and the next set of seasons. Well, Christians believe that in like manner, there's going to be an end of this age. And at that point, Christ comes back. As we can see in this picture, that when Christ comes down, similar to what we saw at the Mount Tabor Transfiguration, that he's going to shine in this transcendent glory of God, that it's going to be God's presence on earth, and it's going to be intense. Now, to the believers, this is going to be intense in like a really exciting way. If we look at the church as the burning bush, or us as individual believers as burning bushes that have received God's indwelling presence, we become like him. We become all fire. We become transformed into yet another aspect of divine love. And like at the Transfiguration, believers go from one form of glory to a yet even greater glory. Father Thomas Hopko wrote, "Our judgment at the end will be by fire, that we stand the fire of the mercy and the love of God upon us. And if we endure that fire, we become all fire. But if we do not endure it, that fire then destroys us." If we look at the picture again, that the bushes that hardened their heart, so to speak, and rejected God's love and refused him to dwell within them, like Pharaoh hardening his heart in Egypt, they become overcome by the intensity. Christ's glory becomes to them a river of fire, and they are consumed and burned. A lot of people think that there's going to be the river of fire, and that's one thing, and then there's going to be this transformation of Christ's light for the believers. But really, when you look at it, it's all coming from the same source. That the fire at Pentecost is the light at the Transfiguration, is the fire of judgment. It's the transcendence of his being as I am what I am, and us becoming more like that because we have him in us. In closing, we followed the symbolism of the burning bush from Exodus all the way to Revelation, from the second book in the Bible all the way to the final one. I mean, like, cover to cover. What a ride. Mr. McConaughey, you're a practical guy. I appreciate that. And you need to apply things right away into your daily life. So here's the big takeaway of how to do that. So I'm going to read some sayings from the Desert Fathers. It says that Abba Lot went to see Abba Joseph and said to him, "Abba, as far as I can in my little office, I fast a little, I pray and meditate. I live in peace, and as far as I can, I purify my thoughts. What else can I do?" Then the old man stood up and stretched his hands towards heaven. His fingers became like 10 lamps of fire, and he said to him, "If you will, you shall become all flame." So, yes, Mr. McConaughey, be a burning bush. That's the big takeaway. Keep holding it down in hostile Hollywood. Trust that God is with you through every challenge. He will preserve you beyond any and all obstacles. Burn with his Holy Spirit and look to the end of the age with hope, when you'll become all fire and go from this glory to another yet even greater glory. I hope that it allows you to see the biblical stories through new eyes, way of approaching these texts with symbolism and allegory, finding the pattern and seeing it all over the place. I mean, like, I left out so much. Here's a prompt for further inquiry. Check out this other story, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego in the fiery furnace, and let me know in the comments what you pick up and see if it aligns with this same pattern of the burning bush. That's all, guys. If you found value in the watching of this content, please click the like button. Clicking the like button tells YouTube, hey, other people are really enjoying this content, and then it's encouraged to share it with a bunch of other people that may benefit from it as well. Another way to support is by purchasing teaching materials, which I've made available in the description below. If you wanted to share this teaching with others in a class or in a lecture, or just even for your own personal edification, I've made the PowerPoint slides available for purchase in the description below. Thank you all for watching. Until next video.